Hello and welcome to this edition of Afroshine Live. We apologize that today we're starting a little late, about 10 minutes late due to some technical issues, but technology works well sometimes and then sometimes it just doesn't work. But at least we've been able to resolve the issues and we're here with you again. We appreciate those who make comments on the show about what we do. Last time we had a former senator of a former American senator on the show, and there were a lot of comments, so we appreciate that. We're still talking about the George Floyd incident in the U.S., and today I'll be talking with a prominent community leader, Dr. Burhan Hamed. Is adjunct professor at Melbourne University. He's also a former Victorian Australian of the Year, and he's been working a lot with communities here in Victoria. Dr. Burhan, how are you tonight?
Good evening, Clyde. Great. Nice to join you this important interview.
That's good. We're very happy to have you. And as I said in my introduction, you have been working with communities a lot. You've been advocating for communities on a number of fields. And today, even though this incident, the George Floyd incident in Minnesota, is not happening in Australia, but it is kind of affecting people all over the world. The whole world is kind of watching this, and people of color, especially, who tend to be victims of police brutality in many countries, find their image reflected on this incident. What's your read about this whole thing?
Well, thank you, Clyde. This is a great opportunity to speak about this as African Australians. This is important because for me, I've gone through this similar journey in Victoria, trying to harmonize between our African community and Victoria Police. As you know, in the past and many, many times, we had a number of problems with our youth and police. And always this has been an agenda that has been buried in many ways. Our communities have had less power to affect the journey. What happened in America, those symptoms have been buried, and this is now has been a time bomb because people had enough of it. I'm sure that we don't have that much in Australia, but if we don't deal with it, it's a question. And our communities, in fact, I've spoken to a number of young people here, and I've asked their opinion, what's their feeling about what happened in America. And everyone was not surprised to what they've seen, what is happening. They said, this is enough that people have to cope with such things, that being Black means not having an opportunity. It's always about charity. Why would it be treated as a second class in many things? Even in jobs now, when you see, they don't see you as a qualified in many areas because of your color of skin, nothing else. I was at Melbourne University. Melbourne University. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just gonna
I was at Melbourne University for over 20 years. Every time I attend staff meeting, a senior staff, every time I'm asked, are you an international student? Are you visiting? They never see you. Anyone, an Englishman or anyone comes from UK today, tomorrow is as normal as anyone in the game. So this is it's a system that has to open. And mainly now in US, what we learn from what happened in US is there is an institutional discrimination.
Well, we will get to the actual and institutional discrimination in just a moment. Let me remind our viewers, those who are watching, as usual, please, we ask you to make a comment where you're watching from, and that will give us some good indications of where our audiences are watching us from. And also, again, as usual, we want this show to be interactive. Please make comment, ask questions. If you have comments that you want to make, including on video, we'll put a number on the screen, and you can send us a text message. We'll send you the link to the studio, and you can actually come in and make your comment or ask questions. But certainly, we'll ask Dr. Burhan to answer some of your questions later on during the show. Now, Dr. Burhan, obviously, police brutality in America is nothing new. It has been happening for quite a while, and Black people have been sort of victims of that brutality for decades. I mean, it goes as far back as slavery. But do you see this as something that is actually going to be different from anything that has happened before?
Well, I don't see it as any different because this has been normalized, which is not to be. But it's been normalized in just 1 month in America. How many of the similar incident has happened? If this case was not by that young woman taken by a video, would not have had life in all this. People had enough, but they were crying loud, but no one to listen. And this incident has brought everything on surface, has brought the world to know what is really happening. So the reaction, as we can see it in US, it's not just African Americans. Even the white people had enough of it. They can see and reflect, and they're standing together. No one supports the violence, but people had enough. They have been treated as a second class ever and ever and ever, and still are. So it is time. And always, all the reports have said, and this has been in Victoria also, if you remember way back, that how many times Victoria police or American police ask a black man versus a white boy in Flemington back in 2004, 2005, 2006. We've gone through this. The number of times young boys of African descent been interrogated was at least 5-6 times more than a normal person. And in US now, statistically, they said 3.5 times the chance of one African man versus another white person. So this tells you, and this is minority. It's not the majority of the, this is about, we're not talking about 100 million. We're talking, about 25 to 30 million people in a big system to have this experience. It tells you there is no justice. People had it, and now this is all over the world. Everyone is reacting because injustice has to stop. People have to be treated as equals.
Now, there is something that a little different this time. I suppose even for the first time, I've seen comments from the UN, United Nations, in relation to this event, with this sad event. China has made comments about. I mean, from time to time, China makes comment about what's happening in the US, but not all that often. But also, even internally in the US, you see a whole lot of white Americans who are protesting in this, whilst when some of these other events happened, it was mostly people of color, blacks and Hispanics. But so it looks like there is something that is going to be happening that is likely to be different from anything else that has happened before. Hopefully, at least we hope that this time, because there's so much reaction, so many reactions from so many people, including the wider population, even the police force in Boston, for example, and many police commanders are condemning this. So, how do you see this developing?
Well, look, there may be some important key elements in this chaos. But if you go back in 1992, where the LA riot has taken, at the time where many African Americans have spoken, and so many things has happened in LA that things to go the same way for over 20 years, it's disgusting. So I hope, but the best thing now, Trump has messed up everything as well. Trump has given the right-wing supremacists a place in America. He gave them an air, and this has helped in the crisis, what's happening. And other people were in the past were not thinking that what African Americans were saying was not as what being said. But now, thanks to Trump, has brought everything into the surface, which was buried. So this, I think, would help. And as you said, this brings international condemnation because people can see it. And don't forget, what makes it unique is that that young girl taking that video and sending it and spreading like a mushroom everywhere, like wildfire, was something that will make a difference. And the two sides videos, then the next one came where there were three of them standing together for that young man, you know, bound in the ground. So the question is now, clearly, this will, I hope, and I hope everyone in US is now saying from all the authorities that this has to stop. And I'm sure this would bring something different. And that difference would reflect worldwide. In fact, even, and I said, what do we learn from it in Australia is another question that we also need to include in our process.
Well,
Because
that was going to be my next question. What do we learn from Australia, the African Australian community here? What's the greatest lesson you think we should get from this?
Well, look, I have been arguing about this for the last 20 years, as I said, with Victoria Police. Why can't our men and women cannot join Victoria Police as in any one case? We have a very travel ways to get there. When someone flies from UK today, can join Victoria Police tomorrow. But our youth, born and bred here, educated here, have a problem getting into Victoria Police. And I say this is not intellectual rigor. This is a cultural rigor. So if Australia, or if we, all of us, to learn something, we need to look into the institutions that are dealing with these issues. They're adopting old cultures that are suiting them than suiting everyone else. So what I say is here, we have to learn that our institutions should open for everyone equally, with equal opportunity. It's enough. We don't need charity. Our youth don't need charity. They're equally educated. They're waiting for opportunity in the corporate, in the government bodies, in any institutions that would give everyone a chance. Our people need chance. If that doesn't come, then we're still not learning anything from this, what happened.
But it is my understanding that Victoria Police, sorry to interrupt, Dr. Burhan, it is my understanding that Victoria Police has been making some sort of effort, at least to try to recruit African Australians. That may not have already sort of resulted into a lot more Africans in the police force, but at least they're making an effort. Where do you see the problem? Why are we still not getting enough African Australians in the police force in Victoria?
Well, the problem I see is, as I said to you, it's a culture. People are set from the same background, judging others to get into that institution through that prism of their culture. The psychological tests and many other tests are components of the people's judgment. And I said it in one of my examples. I said, this is a Euro contest. This is not multicultural contest. Because the people in the side of judging are from the same background. They see things the same. They don't see the other side as well. So look, Victoria Police have made a great contribution and change, but still the culture remains the same. So if there would be anything in the future to change, institutional cultures has to change. And ask yourself, as I said, how many people out of 100 we get in there? We tried to get over 180, 170 people. We still had to get about a handful of them into the system. I did, as you know, I initiated and developed this process to recruit our youth, our men and women, to join Victoria Police. We're still struggling. And my argument is this an intellectual rigor? No, it's a cultural rigor. 21st century Australia is different. 21st century America is different. Policing is different than what used to be. So those changes has to reflect, because now, if you know, crime is more on the internet than on the physical end of it. So this needs a different culture, a different approach, and this different approach should include the process.
Thanks for that. I'm going to trying to bring into the conversation a young commentator, Nyebeni Nam, who's um, um, a research assistant at the University of Sydney, and she's going to be with us in just a moment. Before I get her in to comment on this, what do you think, that Dr. Burhan? What is the main lesson that we should actually learn from this incident in the U.S.? Obviously, this is a U.S. matter, but not just. It does affect how Black people are treated in so many other places. Like Martin Luther King used to say, "Injustice anywhere, it's a threat to justice everywhere." What in terms of our own issues here, and we don't have the same problem like the U.S. does. We still have issues with the police. What would be some of your recommendation to ensure that we don't get to that sort of level of violence or disappointment like we're seeing in the U.S.?
Well, my recommendation is that the institution has to open its doors, has to make many ways of trying to include the multicultural society or communities at large, particularly our communities, which we are struggling with our youth to put trust into the system. So to put our youth to put trust into the system, which I'm spending everyday time talking to young people, going through this experience. The only way I see we learn from US is that we have to change our policing system. We have to deal with these people with respect. We don't need to treat them because they're Black, so they're Black means anything that bad things can happen. No. In every society, there could be some bad boys or bad girls or bad women, bad men, but not everyone is. So we should not be judged based on our skin. So what we learn from here, from US, is US experience is showing us that the process of policing and the inclusiveness of the others in the police would ease and create better understanding of the others. If you don't have them in your table with you, always they are strangers. So if we're going to break this cycle of problems, is for our youth to be part of this process. They should be given equal opportunity to step into this process. If they're not given that process, they will always be outside and always be facing the justice system and police in different ways. So the best way is to include them and to give them chance to be part of the process, not being seen outside the process. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Sorry, we're having I'm having a little bit of a technical issue there. Yes, so people have to be included as part of this. And obviously, when you see what is happening in the over the internet, a lot of people are really condemning this. I'm sure some people are even having some sort of mental issue about this because it's quite distressing. And I suppose in the context of Victoria, with Australia and Victoria specifically, people like you have been really working hard to trying to get, as you said, young people into the police force. The police has been doing something in terms of trying to connect with the community better. Is there anything else that from the community level we should do to try to address this?
Well, look, the best thing to address this is, for me, our community should feel part of the society. And you don't feel part of the society unless you are participating in the process, unless you are contributing. Always, if you are a service recipient, you are always on the other side of the equation. We need to see part of our community members, part of every part of the society, be it police, be it in the public service, be it in the corporate, be it in anywhere. I don't need to be a Black person going there and being a stranger. And some people, they say to me that, well, you are the first Muslim or you are the first Black man to meet. Why would that be when there are many others sitting behind? And in fact, we got so many intellectuals in our community who are left out because they don't have the network, because they were not given opportunities. So the only way forward is we need to be part of the society, not by giving us charity, giving us opportunity.
Okay, I'm gonna bring our other guest online. I've got Nyibeni Nam. Nyibeni, are you with us?
Yes, I'm right here.
Okay, Nyibeni, you are in Sydney. You're a research assistant at the University of Sydney, and you've researched on women, peace, and security. You have a Bachelor of Social Science majoring in politics and international relations at Macquarie University and Masters in International Law. As a young African Australian, when you look at what's happening in America, and specifically the death of George Floyd, what does that bring to your mind?
I think the first reaction is just pure sadness, because especially as an African Australian, the history of racism and brutalization is not something that's very far away from our minds. You know, many of us have come from countries that have seen untold conflict, humanitarian crisis, have had to live in refugee situations where we were policed by what you would call outsiders. As for myself, I was born in Egypt, and so my interactions with the police, even as a young child, were already negative in that context. So then to come to a country like Australia, you know, and to hear the way that these countries are spoken about when we were young, you know, Australia, America, Canada, these are places where Black people can be free, where Black people are, you know, treated equal. This mythology that the West is somehow a place where you could fit in was something that was really appealing to you as a young person. And then to sit here and to go on social media, something that every person does as soon as they wake up, and to watch a video of what is an extrajudicial killing of a man that could look like your father or your brother or your uncle in the streets, and to see that there was no reaction whatsoever on that man's face as he took George Floyd's life away, that is something that I've grappled with. It's pushed me towards both being really angry and wanting to stay on social media, and also being really, really just exhausted and wanting to pull back, you know? Especially having younger brothers and having older brothers and having nephews, my heart bleeds for the fact that this is a world that hasn't changed very much from the days of when we heard about apartheid regime to now. That Black men can still be killed in the street with almost impunity, and that this is something that we just almost have to live with on a regular basis.
All right. Now, one of our audience members here says this issue is bigger than the U.S. This is the reality of Black and brown people everywhere. What's your reaction to that?
Of course, because anti-Blackness itself is not just the original sin of the United States in terms of slavery. I think what I find very disappointing in places like Australia and Canada is that they almost want to separate themselves from the issues in America. They say the racism happens in America, not here. But what they overlook is that the same seed that dehumanized Blackness is the same seed in which their countries were created. The same colonial mentality that defined Black men and Black women as animalistic and less than human is the same sort of process that went into the concept of terra nullius in Australia. It's the same process that means that we now have 400 Indigenous deaths in custody since the 1991 Royal Commission into deaths in custody. 400 people, Black people in this country, maybe not African, but Black people nonetheless. And so this notion that somehow that these are separate struggles is a deflection technique. It's a way of communities to be able to absolve themselves and to say, look, we are better than over there. But if you don't look into your own backyard, if you don't look into the perpetuation of anti-Blackness in your own community in Australia, whether it's things like African gangs and the way that African youth were defined, whether it's concepts like discussing the revocation of citizenship of certain populations. Again, it's about this notion that there is the other and that we are the other no matter what. And to make it even sadder, especially from the perspective that this was originally Indigenous land, it is Indigenous land, and that sovereignty was never ceded. And on top of that, even Indigenous people are defined as the other. The ludicrousness of that can only come from the notion of racism and anti-Blackness.
Absolutely. And stay with us as we continue this conversation. Dr. Burhan, overall, do you think, I mean, we've heard Malcolm Turnbull, for example, commenting on the fact that at some point in Australian politics, some members of the Liberal Party have tried to play with the issue of, African gangs as some sort of political football to get some political capital. Do you see that as a big problem, and that it's not just limited to perhaps that particular person that they mentioned, and that it's actually being played more widely?
It was. Well, look, many political games ever in the elections. If you remember, even the state election, the state laborers have tried to capitalize on justice and crime and all that stuff, which was always cornering the communities seen as a target. And we were the soft target in any way. And this is what the Peter Dutton or the Turnbull's comment. And I have to be honest with you, this is hypocrisy for Turnbull to talk and the others also to watch. This, even from the other side of politics, they should have condemned. If this was the case, where is that, leadership? I mean, this is, again, as my own sister now was saying, blackness has been a question in this country. Blackness has been the other side of the equation, not as equal side. If this process, and this is exactly for the Aborigines, for over 200 years have suffered, we are just copying the same process. So unless the country acknowledges this crisis, unless the country gives it, instead of being political football, people have to realize this is a justice issue and has to be given equal opportunities and equal leadership. Whenever this comes, whenever as a black man is standing, always you are treated as bad or as a criminal. In any state, and I meet with taxi drivers, with many others, always they say, when they approach police with a process that they got a client didn't give them money, they just blame them. Or someone lost money, but the police can, instead of helping them, they tell them, no, look, you can go to their address or you can write them or something to that effect. So, we need to be taken seriously as equal citizens. And this is not in Australia, everywhere, even the rest of the world needs to look this broadly, because it's not the color of skin that makes us good or bad. It's our behavior.
Now, we need to be taken seriously as citizens. Nyibeni, what would you suggest that we as a community do to obviously try to minimize incidents of this type? There are a lot of things that are not within our control. The system is what it is, but what should we start? What steps should we start taking so that we would be able to empower ourselves and start making progress towards less of these incidents?
I think there's only one word that keeps coming to my mind, which is organize, organize, organize. I think that as a community, especially as Africans, we tend to fracture along lines of I'm Somalian, I'm Sudanese, I'm this. And so we tend to deal with issues as one group at a time. But organization and mobilization, we're not going to get anywhere with issues with the police or issues with racial profiling if we approach it at an ad hoc basis. There has to be a clear process of how it is that we're going to engage in dynamic conversations within ourselves and conversations within power structures in Australia. We're not going to be taken seriously if it's only after every incident that we step up and try and deal with that one case at a time. We need to have a culture of resistance, one that also takes into account that our Indigenous brothers and sisters are going through the same thing in this country, and that as people who have come secondary to this, we also need to organize, recognize their struggle, and join hands so that we have a solid movement, a solid idea of what it is that we're fighting for, whether it's police reform, whether it's greater community engagement between the police as well as citizens, whether we're fighting for reduced sentences for younger Australians or rehabilitation programs. These things need to be organized. If it only comes up whenever anger flares up, what we have is just a release of pent-up emotions, and then we go back to the same spot again. As Dr. Benhan was saying with the African gangs thing, I don't take Mr. Turnbull's comment seriously because he had a chance to address this while he was in power and chose instead to use it as a way to sling mud against his hardy compatriots after he was out of power. If he thought what was done with this notion of African gangs as a political tool was wrong, he could have spoken up about it at the time. So what we need in Africa is not to rely on solutions to come from outside, to look for those solutions within ourselves, and to at the same time just keep pushing. Because if it only comes up, like I said, every time some incident happens, what happens is every election cycle, we're back to the same spot. I've been in Australia since I was 9 years old. I'm now 29. And the notion of African gangs is not new to me because every couple of years it comes up again. The South Sudanese are doing this. The black people are doing this, whether it's in Queensland, it's in Victoria, it's in New South Wales. Every couple of election cycles, I somehow turn on the TV and I find people who look like me on there. And It's not like the statistics have changed. It's not like the number of crimes has risen, but that we are just a convenient scapegoat for pent-up frustration of white Australians and, who are feeling lost in these times that are changing, and a very cheap tactic for politicians to mobilize support for themselves. And if we were organized, this thing wouldn't be something that we've had to go through for 20 years. The organization, that's all I say. Learn to work together.
And that's obviously one of the biggest challenge we have, learning to work together. A lot of us agree on, at least on a sort of theoretical level, that it's good for us to work together, but the mechanics of it never seems to work quite well. Any suggestion?
I think one of those things, and I'm loving this especially from what I'm noticing from younger kids. I can't believe I'm at that age where I'm calling them kids, by the way. But one thing I'm noticing from younger kids is that they push for a very sort of pan-African ideal system, to blackness as a unifier rather than as a divider. They've tried to remove things like tribalist leanings, especially within South Sudanese communities. Tribalism is very big. What I've noticed with younger kids that I've seen organizing, whether it's through music, whether it's through art, is that they focus on their shared struggles rather than what it is that makes them different. And with what it is that makes them different, they use that as a point of celebration. So I think we have a lot to learn from younger generations. I think what we're suffering from in terms of divisions in African communities in Australia are often hangovers from when they left their countries, issues with their neighbors, issues with so-and-so's tribe, or issues with this country. Those are hangovers from the generations of my parents. And probably it's still going to take a while to sort of be eradicated from my generation. But what I see is a lot of hope in the younger generation who are trying to break down what are essentially man-made constructions about what it is to be black, to be Eritrean, to be Somalian. These are constructs. Like anything else, constructs can be made and they can be broken. And I believe the young people are doing that.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Stay with us. Dr. Berhan, you've heard comment from Nibeni, whether it's young people or older ones. It's important that we get organized, that we do more in terms of, doing something to address the issues in the system. But we seem to be having issues. You are a prominent community member. You've been doing a lot in trying to advocate for African Australians in a variety of areas. Do you see the need for perhaps the community leaders this time to take matters a bit more seriously and find ways to collaborate and partner to be better organized to try to address some of these structural issues?
Well, look, without the community to stand together and work on this issue, because this has not been a first time. Many challenges has gone, and we all been looking more into who is there and who is that, and identifying each other between us. But also, look, agreeing with this point, but also the system is based on constitution, and the constitution has a responsibility. I mean, I'm not going to expect the Aborigines now, in what they have been treated for over 200 years, whatever you put them, they will still need support. But the Constitution is the one that gives everyone equal fare. I'm not asking people to just jump and be in this. No, the Constitution of this country says is exactly that everyone is equal. Now, that equality, when it comes to black men, to black women, it does not reflect. So for what are my argument, yes, I can understand the challenge our community are facing, but we're coming from a different geography and background. The system has got set institutions to support the process of democracy, to look into fairness, justice. All these systems in place have got a role to play, that we should not beg for our rights. The same in America, the same anywhere. So yes, our community has to stand, and we have to have a strong lobbying power, which you remember back in the early 2000, we were talking about the African think tank establishment. They're looking for how to address the parliament. I myself was standing to do something in the voice of the parliament. But the question is, Clyde, we should not always blame ourselves. This is a system based on constitution, and the constitution has to give everyone a place. Not that I am a black, so I should stand and be counted. Why would I need to do that when the system has got full responsibility, fully funded, fully supported with my tax? I'm not there sitting, someone paying and giving me that. This is my right. This is my responsibility, and the institutions that are funded to do this should have to come out and do this process openly, transparently, and get the community into speed. Unfortunately, we're asking people of grade 1 level, some are from refugee, they never had experience in education. If they be treated badly, we can't blame them. You can't blame the victim. The process is a system established to look to this, has to take steps and support in building these people to be equal standing. Take it from Aboriginal point of view, take it from Africans and anyone in that, for that matter. One person hurt means the whole society is hurt. If
Nyibeni,
a black person.
Yep, let me just bring Nyibeni in to see if she's got something to say in relation to that.
There's nothing that Dr. Berhan has said that I don't agree with. That when you have a system that was constructed to exclude people, by design, that system will perpetuate itself no matter how many reforms you make in, or how many times you come and you scream about your rights. But in Australia and the United States are largely structural. I think what I was saying from my perspective is what can we do ourselves to feel empowered? Because if we know these systems are built in place, these systems are not designed to accommodate us. They're designed to frustrate us when you have a complaint. They're designed to pretty much block you in every way before you give up and you accept your lot in life as this is it, this is where I sit as a citizen in this country. And the thing that's demoralizing about that perspective is there has been a greater outcry now for constitutional reform in terms of Indigenous voice to Parliament. There has been an outcry for treaty and all of these, and these have been happening for generations in terms of Indigenous activism. And then when you look at it from what's happening as newer migrants, as African Australians, one of those things is that unfortunately we are also just then absorbed into the system, also marginalized Indigenous people, and that the only way for that, I feel, for that to change is that we have to get our voices heard. And yes, it's horrible. Why should I have to justify my humanity? Humanity is not a right. Humanity is not a privilege. It's a right. It's what you are. No one can give it to you, and no one can take it away from you. No one should be able to. But that's a beautiful idea in theory. But so far, what we've known for generations, since colonialism, from slavery to now, is that humanity is something that we've had to fight for every single inch of it. Whether it's the right to vote or the right to eat in a certain place or the right to even marry who we want. These are things that we've had to have our ancestors claw from the very hands of white supremacist institutions that have not wanted to include us in their notion of humanity. Now, what that means is that, unfortunately, yes, we will have to keep screaming in the streets. We will have to keep organizing to try and fight for this. And until we get ourselves in a position where we are in these institutions of power, where we are in Parliament, where we are in the police force, where we are in the schools when a child has a complaint about racism, where we are the doctors, where we are the nurses, until we are in a position where we permeate all these aspects of society, institutional change is, at this point, a pipe dream for me.
All right, we have another 7 minutes or so to go with the show. I'll just take a few questions from some of our audience members. Indira Kenya says there's an effort being made in Melbourne in regards to recruiting African Australians into the police force, but is the effort same in other states within Australia? Any one of you wants to take that up? I suppose
I can't really speak to that, to be honest.
Yeah,
I don't think New South Wales has done much with regards to that. But then again, don't quote me on this because I haven't done my research to say that they've done more or less. But I don't see anything that's been as visible as Melbourne. Victoria has been, in my mind, a lot more progressive in pushing to try and include African voices in these places. And I've yet to hear things like that in New South Wales.
Dr. Berhan, what's...
Yes, Clyde. Yes, Clyde. Well, look, in Victoria, it took us so long to come to where we are. And now we're talking, there are some, Western Australia have started some of this in different ways. South Australia also, they did something to call it in a cadetship or whatever to help young Africans to join the police. But as I said earlier, all these other process has been a charity like. It's not seen as full opportunity. We have the qualification and the skills. What we need is the process need to be, diverse. All the people are in judgment, are of the same background. When they judging these people, they judging them with different judgment. It's not about that we don't have the capacity. It's not that we don't have the skills. It's the process that has got a problem. It's the
Okay.
process that need to be tested and checked, because
All
we
right.
cannot fail every African in any way by giving different reasons. For me, the process, the institutions has to open their doors. It's not only Victoria Police. All other institutions equally, they need to do an internal review where our kids are graduating and not getting into the process. Why? Why other kids from the same university are getting there? Why our kids are not getting?
All right.
Thank you.
One thing that comes to my mind, until recently, the word diversity used to mean mostly, ethnic diversity, mostly people from different backgrounds, black, yellow, brown, whatever you call it. But now that word is no longer really connected to that ethnic that diversity. It's more about all these other things that are coming up, including the LGBTI community, which is kind of watering down, at least in my understanding, some of the things that some of the efforts that were being directed, particularly to more vulnerable communities from ethnic background. Do you guys agree with that? That is likely to make our job a little harder.
Well, look. Okay, go.
You want to go first, Dr. Beth?
Yeah. No, go ahead. You go ahead, Nyibani, and we'll get Dr. Barhan to comment after that.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to respectfully sort of slightly disagree with your point there.
That's all right.
Only because when it comes to the notion of other forms of diversity, whether it's gender, whether it's LGBTQI people, these are things that also apply to ethnically and nationally diverse people. We have Black gay people, we have Black women who find other forms of discrimination that are a direct result of their Blackness and their gender. So I don't think that it's necessarily watering down the issue. I think what's happening is that some institutions may think, oh, well, if diversity just means LGBTQI, they can choose someone who's LGBT who's just white, yeah? Mm-hmm. But they can then just choose to keep choosing from the same ethnic pool of people, but as long as they can tick one box and say transgender or gay or a woman, and as long as they can tick those boxes, these people can all have the same name, Smith, Johnson, and Murphy, and it doesn't matter. And so what we have is a convoluted notion of diversity. It's an exclusive notion of diversity. It's no longer about diversity of experiences. It's a matter of just covering their bases so that when they are told that you have a diversity problem, they can say, look, no, here's Dr. Johnson, he's a gay man who's married. And it doesn't matter that Dr. Johnson grew up in a suburb where he's never interacted with Black people whatsoever. It doesn't matter that he may also have those biases that are reflective of the system, as long as they can say, we can't be accused of being, not diverse. So that's in the way that I can say that the issue might have watered down, that it could be used by people to just cover themselves.
Yeah, people were just ticking boxes rather than doing the real work of showing diversity through the institution. Dr. Barhan, what's your take on that?
Well, look, I can't agree more with Nibin on this issue, which I really, to be honest with you, I don't want to use the diversity as much as I need to use in this discussion, because diversity has been used and abused in many ways. One of the best classical examples, if you remember, lately since 2010, diversity of corporate boardrooms was one of the biggest topic in the corporate world. And the diversity when all from the same Anglo-Saxon women were being the diversity in that equation. No other colors has been added. And the difference we need to look, as Nibin said, we are, our color is visible, and our LGBT and others are not as visible as we are. We are really having barriers to open the door. Others can open the door and get in. But for us to open the door, for our kids, opening the door is the hardest job. Once the door open, being tested is another thing. But for us, our color is making that journey to open the door not easy. So the question of diversity first, it has to open for everyone equally. The door has to open. But LBGT from a white background is easy to open the door. They know LBGT when they are sitting on the table, but they don't know when they are knocking the door. In our case, when we knock the door, they know who we are. And then that starts the door opening or not opening. Thank you.
So that high visibility may be a problem. I'm sorry that we're running out of time right now. We're coming to the end of the show. I want to thank you, Dr. Burhan and Nyebeni Nam, for your time to this discussion. It's obviously a very important discussion that ought to be continued. And the George Floyd incident, I suppose, will stay in the media for quite some time. We'll continue to run a few commentary and discussions on this platform for the next days and weeks to come. Hopefully something good comes out of this. Thank you again, Dr. Burhan and Nyebeni, for your time. And for those who are watching, thank you again. Continue to share our videos and continue to comment, and also contact us if you have something that you would like to share with the community that can add value into a community life. Until next time, stay blessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Clyde. It's a great opportunity. And please, let's get these things as much as possible to bring to the attention that this change is needed here, not anywhere else, but with us. We need to be part of this game. We need to participate. If we don't bring this equation, chance will not repeat itself. The world is aware of this issue. The world is giving attention. All authorities are looking at it. It is time for us to hammer it and to bring it on the table so that we have equal opportunity
absolutely
for future. Thank you.
Africa Media will continue to bring this issue on the table. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.